Your obligation is finally over." Those 6 words, spoken so casually at my mother-in-law's graveside, would forever mark the moment my life split in two. Before and after, married and abandoned. Caregiver and what? Who was I now? I stood frozen beside the fresh mound of earth that covered Rose Blackwell. The woman I had bathed, fed, and comforted through 15 years of declining health. The cool October wind whipped around us, but it wasn't the chill that made me shudder. It was the finality in my husband's voice. Andrew placed his hand on my shoulder, not in comfort, but in dismissal. The funeral attendees had drifted away, leaving just the two of us beside Rose's grave. I expected grief from him, perhaps gratitude toward me instead. His face wore an expression I'd never seen before, relief mixed with impatience. "I filed the papers yesterday." He continued, checking his watch. "My lawyer will contact yours. I've taken an apartment downtown." Papers. My voice sounded distant, as though coming from someone else. What papers? Divorce papers. Patricia. He said it like he was telling me we needed milk from the store. I've been planning this for a while, just waiting for the right time. The right time. The right time was immediately after his mother's funeral. The right time was after I had spent 15 years of my life caring for his mother. The right time was after a quarter-century of marriage. "You've been planning this." My legs felt unsteady beneath me. "For how long?" "Does it matter?" Andrew adjusted his tie, a nervous habit he'd had since law school. "Look, we both know our marriage has been over for years. Mom was the only thing keeping us together. And now my obligation is over." I repeated his words, the enormity of what was happening finally beginning to sink in. "That's all it was to you, an obligation." Andrew sighed, checking his watch again. "I have a meeting at 4. Can we not do this here? The car service is waiting to take you home. I'll collect my things tomorrow while you're at your sister's." And with that he walked away, leaving me alone with a fresh grave and the ruins of what I had thought was my life. My name is Patricia Harmon, and at 58 years old, I found myself abandoned at my mother-in-law's funeral by the man I had spent half my life with. I met Andrew Blackwell during my final year of nursing school. He was in his 2nd year of law school, brilliant, ambitious, and charismatic. Our courtship was a whirlwind, and within a year we were married. I was 25, he was 27, and the future stretched before us, bright with promise. For the first 10 years, we lived the life I had always dreamed of. Andrew's career at a prestigious Chicago law firm flourished, while I found fulfillment as an ER nurse at Cook County Hospital. We traveled entertained and talked about starting a family, though somehow the time never seemed quite right. Looking back, I realize Andrew always had a reason to delay another case, another promotion, another renovation on our Lincoln Park townhouse. Then Rose had her first stroke. Andrew was her only child, and his father had passed years earlier. There was never any question about what would happen next. Rose moved into our guest room temporarily while she recovered. 6 months later, she was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. The neurologist explained the long road ahead with clinical detachment, but I understood what it meant. As a nurse, I had seen the toll this disease took not just on patients, but on families. "We'll get her the best care," Andrew declared on the drive home from the doctor's office. A private nurse, the best facility, if it comes to that. But Rose was terrified of nursing homes. She would clutch my hand and beg, "Don't let them put me away. Patty, please don't let them lock me up to die alone." How could I refuse her? This woman who had welcomed me into her family, who had taught me to make her famous. Apple pie who had nursed Andrew through childhood illnesses and cheered at his law school graduation. She deserved dignity in her final years, so I made the decision that would alter the course of my life. I reduced my hours at the hospital, then eventually resigned altogether. "It's temporary. I told myself, just until we get a handle on Rose's care. Temporary stretched into permanent days, became months became years, and Rose's condition steadily declined. The vibrant, intelligent former high school English teacher who had once corrected Andrew's grammar, even in casual conversation, gradually disappeared, replaced by a confused, sometimes combative stranger who required constant supervision. The physical demands were exhausting. Rose had always been a tall, substantial woman, and as her mobility decreased, helping her bathe, use the bathroom, and move from bed to chair became increasingly difficult. The emotional toll was even greater. Watching someone you love slowly lose their memories, their personality, their very self. Andrew threw himself into his work more than ever. "Someone has to pay for all this," he would say when I mentioned his increasing absences, and it was true, Rose's care was expensive, even with my providing most of it. Special equipment medications, occasional respite care when I simply couldn't go on without a break, it all added up. But it wasn't just about money. I saw the pain in Andrew's eyes when Rose called him by his father's name, or worse, didn't recognize him at all. So I made excuses for his late nights at the office, his weekend work emergencies, his business trips that grew more frequent and longer in duration. I didn't just become Rose's caregiver. I became her advocate, her translator, the keeper of her dignity. I learned to read the meaning behind her increasingly incoherent speech. I discovered that playing music from the 1950s could calm her during sundowning episodes. I found ways to help her feel useful, like folding washcloths or sorting colorful buttons, tasks that gave her moments of peace. On good days, we would sit in the garden I had planted specifically with her in mind, full of fragrant herbs that would trigger memories and sensory engagement. I would read to her from her favorite books, and sometimes, just sometimes, she would recite along with me, passages from Jane Austen or Emily Dickinson that remained lodged in some still functioning corner of her mind. On bad days when she lashed out in fear and confusion, when she soiled herself or threw food, or called me horrible names, I would remind myself that this wasn't Rose. This was the disease. And when the day was done, I would collapse into bed, often alone, because Andrew was working late again, and gather my strength for tomorrow. Friends drifted away over time. It became too difficult to maintain social engagements when Rose required such constant attention. Even my sister Diane, who lived in Milwaukee, only managed monthly visits. "I don't know how you do it," she would say, hugging me as she left. "You're a saint, Patty." I wasn't a saint. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, days I resented the life I had given up, moments I was ashamed to admit even to myself when I wondered how much longer Rose would live, and then hated myself for having such thoughts. Dr. Nathan Wells, Rose's neurologist, became one of my few regular contacts with the outside world. His monthly house calls were a lifeline of adult conversation and professional validation. "What you're doing matters. Patricia," he told me during one particularly difficult period. "I see the difference specialized loving care makes. My other patients in facilities don't get this level of attention." His words sustained me on the hardest days, as did Olivia Carter, our neighbor who would sometimes sit with Rose while I ran necessary errands. Olivia was a family law attorney who worked primarily from home, giving her flexibility that my other friends lacked. "You know what you're doing has economic value," she said to me once. "If Andrew was paying for this level of care in a facility, it would cost a fortune." I brushed off her comment. Money wasn't the point. I was doing this out of love for Rose and for Andrew, because that's what families do. They take care of each other. The last 3 years of Rose's life were the most challenging. She became completely bedridden, unable to speak in coherent sentences. I had to use a mechanical lift to move her to prevent both her and myself from injury. Hospice provided some support, but the bulk of the daily care still fell to me. Andrew came home later and later. Some nights he didn't come home at all, citing early meetings or late work sessions. I was too exhausted to question him, too focused on Rose's needs to notice the signs that should have been obvious. When Rose finally passed, it was peaceful at least. She simply stopped breathing one night, while I sat beside her bed, reading poetry aloud as I often did. One moment she was there, her labored breathing, the soundtrack to our evenings, and then she was gone. I called Andrew at the office but got his voicemail. It was the hospice nurse who sat with me until he finally arrived home 3 hours later. The funeral was small but dignified, just as Rose would have wanted. Andrew gave a touching eulogy that brought tears to my eyes. Stories of his childhood, of Rose's dedication as a teacher and a mother. He even mentioned my devotion to her care, calling me selfless, and the daughter Rose never had. It all seemed so genuine that his words at the graveside afterward struck like a physical blow. Your obligation is finally over. Had that been all it was to him? An obligation. The days following the funeral passed in a blur. I went to Diane's as planned. Not telling her about Andrew's bombshell, I couldn't bear to say it aloud yet. When I returned home 2 days later, large portions of Andrew's closet were empty, his toiletries gone from our bathroom. On the kitchen counter sat a folder with my name written on it in his precise handwriting. Inside was a property settlement proposal, clearly prepared well in advance. It offered me a fraction of our marital assets. The townhouse we had purchased together 20 years ago, now worth considerably less than our newer lake house, a modest cash settlement, and none of his retirement accounts or investments. I sat at the kitchen table until night fell. The folder opened before me, trying to understand how 25 years of marriage could be reduced to such a cold calculation, how 15 years of caregiving could be so thoroughly devalued. That night I couldn't sleep in our bed. Instead, I wandered into Rose's room, now empty of the hospital equipment that had crowded it for so long. The silence was deafening. For 15 years, I had organized my life around the rhythms of Rose's care medications at specific times. Position changes to prevent bed sores, constant monitoring for signs of discomfort or distress. Now there was nothing but emptiness, and the knowledge that not only had I lost Rose, I had lost my marriage as well. In the morning, operating on autopilot, I went to Rose's dresser where I kept her important documents. I wanted to find the sympathy cards that had arrived, thinking I should send thank you notes. Instead, I found a sealed envelope with Rose's handwriting on it. For Patricia, open after I'm gone. With trembling hands, I opened it to find a letter dated 3 years earlier, during a period of unusual lucidity Rose had experienced briefly after a medication adjustment. My dearest Patricia, it began. If you're reading this, then I am finally at peace and you are finally free. I cannot express what your care has meant to me. You have been the daughter of my heart, more devoted than I could have ever imagined anyone would be. I worry that in your dedication to me, you have lost yourself. Please find your way back to joy. You deserve every happiness. Enclosed with the letter was a bank statement for an account I'd never seen before in Rose's name. According to the most recent statement it contained, just over $300,000. This is my gift to you. The letter continued. Andrew doesn't know about this account. It came from the sale of my family's farmland years ago. I've never touched it, and Andrew's father and I agreed it would be my separate property. Use it to rebuild your life after I'm gone. Travel, return to nursing, if that's what you want. Or do something entirely new. Just promise me you'll live for yourself now. I sat on Rose's bed, clutching the letter. Tears streaming down my face. Even in her illness, even as she depended on me for everything, Rose had been thinking of my future. She had seen what I hadn't allowed myself to see, that my marriage was crumbling, that Andrew was pulling away, that I would need an escape route. Something shifted inside me. The fog of grief and shock began to clear, replaced by a cold, clarifying anger. Andrew had planned his exit meticulously, waiting until his mother was gone, expecting me to be too beaten down, too exhausted, too financially dependent to fight back. He thought I would accept his insulting settlement out of desperation. He thought 15 years as a caregiver had made me weak. He was wrong. That afternoon I called Olivia. I need your help, I said when she answered, and I need you to recommend the most aggressive divorce attorney in Chicago. Patricia. Her voice was concerned. What's happened? Andrew left me the day of Rose's funeral. He's been planning it for months, possibly years. The silence on the line was brief. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't touch anything he left you. Don't sign anything. True to her word. Olivia arrived quickly, a bottle of wine in one hand and a notepad in the other. I showed her Andrew's settlement proposal, and her expression darkened as she read. This is insulting, she said finally, and likely nowhere near what you're entitled to under Illinois law. 25 years of marriage, 15 of which you spent providing full-time care to his mother. Oh no, honey, we're not accepting this. Over the next several hours, Olivia helped me take inventory of what I knew about our marital assets. The townhouse, the lake house in Michigan. Andrew's partnership shares in his law firm, our investment accounts. Art and antiques collected over the years. It was more than I had realized, and according to Olivia, I was entitled to half plus. She added, making notes. There's the value of the care you provided. If Andrew had placed Rose in a high-end memory care facility, he would have paid at least $120,000 a year. Over 15 years, that's $1,008 million he effectively saved because of your labor. Can that really be factored into a divorce settlement? I asked. It can, and it should be. It's called opportunity cost. You gave up your nursing career to care for his mother. That's lost. Wages, lost retirement, contributions, lost professional advancement. Any good divorce attorney will make that case. At the time Olivia left, I had a plan and an appointment with Catherine Walsh, who Olivia described as the attorney wealthy men fear most in divorce court. That night I sat in Rose's room again, rereading her letter, thinking about the woman she had been before the disease took hold. Strong-principled, unwilling to accept less than she deserved. I decided then that I would face what was coming with the same strength she had shown throughout her life. The next morning, I began gathering evidence. I found Andrew's separate credit card statements in his home office, revealing months of charges for restaurants I'd never been to. Hotels in Chicago when he'd claimed to be working late gifts from jewelry stores and high-end boutiques that had never made their way to me. I photographed everything before returning it exactly as I had found it. I made copies of tax returns, investment statements, property deeds. I created a detailed log of the care I had provided to Rose, including all the nights Andrew had been absent. I reached out to Dr. Wells, who readily agreed to provide documentation of Rose's care needs and my role in meeting them. I've been concerned about you, Patricia, he admitted during our call. I've seen caregivers destroyed by the burden they carry, especially when they don't have adequate support. What Andrew did, it's unconscionable. Over the next few weeks, I moved methodically building my case while maintaining an outward appearance of defeated acceptance whenever Andrew made one of his brief appearances to collect more of his belongings. My lawyer will be in touch about the settlement, he said during one such visit, not quite meeting my eyes. Of course, I replied quietly, whatever you think is fair. He looked relieved at my apparent docility. That was Andrew's fundamental mistake. He had always underestimated me. He saw my gentleness as weakness, my devotion as desperation. He didn't understand that the strength required to care for someone through a long degenerative illness was the same strength that would now see me through this fight. Catherine Walsh proved every bit as formidable as Olivia had promised. In our first meeting, she listened intently as I laid out the situation, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly taking notes in a leather-bound notebook. Mrs. Harmon, she said when I had finished, based on what you've told me and the documentation you've provided, I believe we have an extremely strong case for an equitable distribution that far exceeds what your husband has offered. I don't want to be vindictive. I said I just want what's fair. Catherine smiled a sharp expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. In my experience, men like your husband only understand one language consequences. He abandoned you after you sacrificed 15 years of your life caring for his mother. Now he'll learn that actions have costs. The process moved more quickly than I had expected. Catherine filed a counterproposal that rejected Andrew's initial offer and outlined our demands: half of all marital assets, spousal support, reflecting the length of our marriage, and additional compensation for the years of care I had provided to Rose. Andrew's response came through his attorney: outraged dismissal of the caregiver compensation concept and a slightly improved but still inadequate counteroffer. He thinks we're negotiating. Catherine told me. We're not. We're stating facts. He can accept reality now, or he can face it in court. 2 months after Rose's funeral, I was leaving Dr. Wells' office after a follow-up discussion about my documentation when I quite literally bumped into a woman in the hallway. I'm so sorry. I apologized, steadying myself against the wall. No harm done, she replied with a smile, then looked at me more closely. Wait, are you Patricia Harmon? I nodded, confused. I'm Vanessa Kimmel. I work with Andrew at Frost & Mitchell. She extended her hand, which I shook automatically. I just wanted to say how sorry I am about your mother-in-law. And the other situation. Andrew has been. Well, it's been difficult for him. Something in her tone and the familiarity with which she spoke of Andrew made the pieces click into place. This wasn't just a colleague. This was why Andrew had been working so many late nights, why he had been planning his exit strategy for months. I maintained my composure somehow. Yes, it's been a challenging time for everyone. How do you know about our personal situation? Vanessa flushed slightly. Oh, Andrew and I have become quite close. We've been working on several major cases together. He talks to me about everything. I'm sure he does. I thought but said only, how nice to have such a supportive colleague. That evening, I called Catherine and told her about the encounter. She was silent for a moment, then asked, how would you feel about hiring a private investigator? The investigation confirmed what I already suspected. Andrew and Vanessa had been involved for at least a year. They had traveled together on supposed business trips. She had been to our lake house while I was at home caring for Rose. Most damning of all, Andrew had been shifting funds to accounts Catherine hadn't uncovered yet, presumably to shield them from the divorce settlement. The discovery of these hidden assets changed the entire complexion of our case. What had been strong became ironclad. Catherine filed amended papers, now including allegations of dissipation of marital assets and financial impropriety. Andrew's attorney requested an emergency meeting. For the first time since the funeral, I found myself in the same room with Andrew, seated across a conference table, Catherine beside me, his attorney beside him. Vanessa, notably, was not present. This has gotten out of hand. Andrew's attorney began. We're prepared to offer a more generous settlement to avoid the unpleasantness of a public trial. Catherine smiled that sharp smile again. We're not interested in generosity, counselor. We're interested in justice. Your client has concealed assets, engaged in an extramarital affair while his wife cared for his dying mother, and now wants to dismiss 15 years of skilled nursing care as an obligation. The court will take a very dim view of such behavior. Andrew looked at me directly for the first time. Patty, be reasonable. You don't want to do this. Actually, Andrew, I do. My voice was calm, steady. For 25 years, I've been reasonable. I've been accommodating. I've put your needs and your mother's needs above my own. Now it's time for me to advocate for myself with the same dedication I showed to Rose. The settlement we eventually reached was everything Catherine had asked for and more, half of all assets, including those Andrew had attempted to hide. Substantial spousal support. The lake house, which I had always loved more than the townhouse, and a separate payment acknowledging the economic value of the care I had provided to Rose. The day the final papers were signed, Catherine handed me a check larger than any I had ever seen in my life. Congratulations, she said. You earned every penny of this. Now what are you going to do with the rest of your life? It was a question I hadn't allowed myself to consider in 15 years. What did I want? Who was I now that I was neither wife nor caregiver? The answer came gradually, over the months that followed. With Rose's secret gift and the divorce settlement, I had financial security. What I lacked was purpose. I started by volunteering at an Alzheimer's support group, sharing what I had learned through my years with Rose. The gratitude of overwhelmed caregivers. Their relief at finding someone who truly understood their struggles awakened something in me. With Dr. Wells' encouragement, I enrolled in a master's program in social work, specializing in gerontology. At 58, I was easily the oldest student in most of my classes, but my practical experience gave me insights my younger classmates lacked. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I used a portion of my settlement to establish the Rose Blackwell Caregiver Support Foundation, providing respite care training and financial assistance to those caring for loved ones with dementia. Dr. Wells Nathan, as I now called him, joined the foundation's board and became a steadfast ally in navigating the healthcare system to benefit caregivers. Our professional relationship gradually evolved into friendship and then, to my surprise, into something more. "I've admired you for years," he told me during our first official date. "Your compassion, your strength, your dignity through everything. It's extraordinary." A year after Rose's death, I visited her grave alone. The anger I had carried toward Andrew had faded, replaced by something like pity. His relationship with Vanessa had ended messily. According to mutual acquaintances, his reputation at the firm had suffered when details of our divorce became known. He had essentially sacrificed a quarter-century of history and goodwill. For what? A brief escape that had ultimately left him more alone than before. I placed her namesake flower on the grave and sat on the bench nearby. "Thank you," I said aloud, imagining she could hear me. "Not just for the gift you left me, but for teaching me what strength really looks like, for showing me that it's never too late to begin again." As I stood to leave, I noticed a figure approaching from the cemetery gates. Andrew, looking older and more careworn than when I'd last seen him. He stopped short when he saw me. "Patricia," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I come every month," I replied. It was true, despite everything I had loved Rose and mourned her loss. He nodded, uncomfortable. "You look well. I hear you started some kind of foundation." "The Rose Blackwell Caregiver Support Foundation. We're helping families caring for loved ones with dementia." That's good." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I should have thanked you properly for what you did for Mom. It was above and beyond. I don't think I ever really understood what it cost you." It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get. "No," I said, "you didn't understand. But I didn't do it for your gratitude, Andrew. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because Rose deserved dignity and love in her final years." We stood in awkward silence for a moment before I continued. "I should go. I have a board meeting this afternoon." As I walked past him, he called after me, "Are you happy, Patty? After everything?" I paused, considering the question. The past year had been a journey from devastation to reconstruction. I had grieved not just for Rose, but for the years I had lost the career. I had abandoned the marriage that had withered while I wasn't watching. But I had also discovered my own resilience, built a new purpose, and found unexpected joy. "Yes," I said, "finally I am happy. Not despite everything, but because of it. Every experience, even the painful ones, especially the painful ones, has brought me to where I am now." As I drove away from the cemetery, I reflected on the strange path my life had taken. If Andrew hadn't abandoned me so cruelly, would I have found the strength to reinvent myself? If Rose hadn't left me that letter and account, would I have had the resources to fight for what I deserved? Sometimes the deepest wounds create the strongest people. Sometimes the greatest betrayals lead to the most profound liberation. My obligation was over, yes, but my life, My real life was just beginning. The foundation grew beyond my initial vision. Within 2 years, we had established partnerships with 3 major hospitals to provide training and support for family caregivers. We advocated for policy changes at the state level to recognize the economic value of family caregiving in Medicaid spend-down calculations. We created a respite care network that allowed caregivers regular breaks, something I had rarely experienced during my time with Rose Nathan, and I married in a small ceremony by the lake surrounded by new friends and old ones who had reconnected with me since the divorce. Diane served as my matron of honor, tearfully telling guests how proud she was of her little sister, who turned out to be the strongest person I know. I kept Rose's photo on my desk at the foundation offices. Sometimes, when facing a particularly difficult challenge, I would look at her image, not the confused, fragile woman of her final years, but the vibrant teacher from a photograph taken decades earlier, and draw strength from her memory. The letter she had left me remained in my bedside drawer, its paper growing soft from frequent handling. "Please find your way back to joy," she had written. In honoring that request, I had discovered something profound. Joy isn't a destination we reach despite our struggles. It's a capacity we develop because of them. Andrew had meant those 6 words. Your obligation is finally over, as a dismissal. A reduction of 15 years of devotion to mere duty. Instead, they had become a catalyst for transformation. My obligation was indeed over, but not just to Rose or to a marriage that had become a hollow shell. The obligation I had been freed from was the one I had imposed on myself to be smaller than I was, to accept less than I deserved, to measure my worth by others' recognition. That obligation was finished. And in its place bloomed something far more powerful, the freedom to become fully myself.